I'm back specially just to sing Femi Femu, Oko Mama.
Thank you.
That's all I'm here to say.
Good morning. Welcome
Morning,
back to Lagos. I'm actually very happy to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good morning,
Adefemi.
Good morning, Professor Killer.
Good morning.
Let me tell you what is happening around the world. Now, top diplomats from the world's largest economies have gathered in Johannesburg for 2 days talk held for the first time in Africa. The G20, which is a grouping of 19 countries, as well as the European Union and the African Union, is deeply divided on key issues from Russia's war in Ukraine to climate change. Now, world leaders have also been split on how to respond to the dramatic policy shifts from Washington since the return of US President Donald Trump. It is these international relations that have formed part of Cyril Ramaphosa's speech, which started with the acknowledgement of the significance of this meeting being held on African soil for the first time. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
This, in many ways, highlights the growing importance of the African continent in global, economic, political, and environmental discussions that are ensuing around the world. This summit's location underscores the need for African voices to be heard on critical global issues like sustainable development, the digital economy, and the shift towards the green energy. It is a great opportunity, too, to promote greater collaboration between African nations and the rest of the world.
Well, interestingly enough, he mentioned the importance of collaboration with the rest of the world. And are those sentiments shared by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was not there in attendance? He said that he didn't want to waste taxpayer money or coddle anti-Americanism, and that's why he didn't go. Now, Ramaphosa, in response to that, said that he did not take the absence of Marco Rubio as a snub, since the US did still send a delegation. But it could also be argued that that move from the United States, from Marco Rubio himself, shows that the US is not taking Africa seriously. Now, in another example of the tensions at the meeting, the planned family photograph was cancelled as several countries did not wish to appear next to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Let's not forget that South Africa has also been criticized for its ties with Russia, including not condemning its 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Now, staying with Ukraine, the White House is pressuring Ukraine to sign a minerals deal that would allow the US to access critical elements and minerals, including lithium, titanium, as well as a sizable coal, gas, and access to oil and uranium deposits. Now, it's a supply worth billions of dollars. US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says that access to these rare minerals in Ukraine could be exchanged in return for aid or even as compensation for the support the US has already provided over the years. Now, in response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has refused that offer, saying that the state of Ukraine is not for sale. All this talk about minerals came after Zelensky had a meeting with the US chief envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, in Kyiv. Now, Zelensky said that he and the US special envoy had a detailed conversation about the battlefield situation, about how to return their prisoners of war and effective security guarantees. But Kellogg didn't say anything as a news conference was cancelled at the last minute. Finally, the Israeli military says one of the bodies released by Hamas did not belong to any of the hostages held in Gaza, accusing Hamas of violating an already shaky ceasefire. Now, the pictures that you see here are of the Gvir family. Now, two of the bodies were positively identified as infant Kifir Bibas and his 4-year-old brother Ariel, while a third body that was supposed to be their mother, Shiri, was found not to match any hostage and remained unidentified. Now, the Palestinian militants of Hamas handed over 4 black coffins in a carefully orchestrated public display as a crowd of Palestinians and dozens of armed Hamas militants watched on, creating a spectacle which was condemned by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. I mean, it's a very difficult situation, isn't it, that we're seeing in Gaza. It is heartbreaking, first and foremost, because I know everybody saw those pictures, those very cute children, their very distinct red hair, and how beautiful they were. And the pictures there show when they were captured on the 7th of October. And even you hear people in the background saying, no worries, we're not going to hurt children, everything's going to be okay. And unfortunately, All three of them did die. And it is believed, according to Hamas, that they died from shelling sent by Israel. But nevertheless, they did die. And it is unfortunate that now, with the return of their bodies, their mother's body was not along. And I'm not sure what has happened there, how it is that Israel has been able to determine that the body does not belong to the mother, and why there's been a mumble or some sort of mess up in that situation. So a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about. From Israel, I mean, you mentioned it. Beautiful kids, dead body. In between that, your summary is the process of calling parents to come and identify little children's dead body. Then there is the argument about, is it the right body? Clearly not the wrong body. I just want people to know the gravity of war. You know, regardless of who's going to go right. This idea of thinking you fight for your rights and people die is because we take it in abstract. The origin of evil is when we dehumanize human beings. If we can think that every dead body is a child of somebody, is a lover of another, is a student of somebody, we will think not twice, but a lot of time before killing anybody or before going to war. And I really think anybody who loves humanity should think of peace in Israel and every part of the world, regardless of who's right or wrong, just to save lives. Then we can look at other things. The US and Ukraine, I see the crudeness of Trumpism. This very pedestrian way of saying you have mineral, we want it, we're going to take it, we can use it as payback, or we can buy it. That is the language of a trader, and with all respect to traders, but you know, it's a very transactional thing that is alien to the sophistication, some people would say hypocrisy, of diplomacy and the hallowed chambers. And it is a shame that we're where we are with this kind of language. I hope it's just a comma in the history of the world, and the whole world does not turn so pedestrian and transactional. The magic needs to come back.
Just in G20, South Africa is currently leader of G20 currently, and they're hosting in Africa, and I think that's quite significant for us. But very importantly, of course, as would imagine, what would dominate conversations at these meetings would be the Russia-Ukraine war, especially as a number of countries are split. We already know where the US stands, because of what their president has said. And so he has said that he's more, I mean, from the optics, from what he has said, leaning more towards Russia, and then asking Zelensky, called him a comedian, a failed comedian or something like that, came very harshly with him on words, on Truth Social, and then on X later on. It would be interesting to find out what the conclusions would be, because European leaders are saying that they're standing firmly, you know, behind Zelensky. And the US has pivoted from their policy on this war following the elections or following the inauguration of President Trump as, you know, as coming in. So I don't know how they plan. Is he also going to ask the US to abstain from G20 as well? Because there's been a lot of, we're standing alone, we're doing what we can, we're the superpower, and that's the end of it. But I hope we can learn, as you've talked about, Professor Kila, from the Israeli-Hamas war, needless, unfortunate deaths, especially when young children and women are killed. And oftentimes, I mean, if you look at War and Peace, you would see that sometimes the worst victims are children and women who are let me use the word innocent in the player field.
This idea of men dying.
No. I'm saying that
children and women will never be on the front line.
So many of the men are recruited to be, you know, to fight. But the women and children are because their father was released on the 1st of February, but the women and the children came out, you know, having just their bodies that we received. I'm not downplaying men being killed.
In town. Men don't want to die again.
No, I'm just saying that they asked to go to war. They went to war. The women and children also are collateral damage in many cases.
A couple of things. I mean, anytime I keep trumping this Trumpism, a lot of people think I'm mad, but it's playing out. Can anybody really ask, what did America get in return when they gave a $14 billion package in the Marshall Plan after the Second World War? So Trump trying to ask for a payback with minerals for helping the Ukrainians to stem the tide of dictatorship and imperialism of Putin, which was emboldened after taking Crimea, Abkhazia, and if he takes Ukraine, he might probably want to knock on the door of any other country in continental Europe.
Sweden's right there.
And Sweden, and probably when he's done with all of that, he will give a shot at the UK and take Europe. So Trump
That's
saying
serious,
all
exactly
of
that,
it's this is Third World War stuff. And we think it's child's play. But Trump is still being transactional because he's obviously in Putin's pocket. The question we should ask for the sake of balance is, he keeps talking about Ukraine being, the president being illegitimate. But is Netanyahu legitimate? The last time I checked, were they not supposed to have elections in Israel too?
Yes.
Today now, Africa is hosting G20. He says Marco Rubio is not going to be there. Why? Because they have a tiff with South Africa based on Elon Musk over the rights of South Africans over these years that they're now fighting for. But at the same time, look at the way they play the pick and choose politics in the world. Russia sits with South Africa on BRICS. There's a great association there. Nothing happens. He's got no problems with Russia. When BRICS come together as a collective, he's got a problem with them. He singles out BRICS, but he can't do the same for Putin, who is a global pariah. America has lost its sense of leadership in the world today. We're talking about bodies in Gaza.
Yeah.
America bomb is also out there. America's hand is in this blood we are seeing in this country.
We will come back to you, Rufai, for the rest of your comments. Let's move on to the newspapers across the globe. And as ever, we begin in Nigeria with the front page of This Day. And This Day, alongside every Nigerian paper on our deck this morning, either leads or features the admission of Ibrahim Babangida that Moshood Abiola won the June 12, 1993 election. Now, as the New Telegraph and the Daily Trust go on to report, his words on the matter come 32 years after the fact. Now, the Punch and the Nation include IBB's comments of regret over this annulment, which he says was done by Abacha forces without his approval, in his newly launched autobiography titled A Journey in Service, which was unveiled in Abuja on Thursday. Our very own Rufai was there. Staying with the story, and the Vanguard leads with IBB's fear that the assassination of MKO Abiola could have led to a civil war. Now, The Guardian also reports on Attorney General of the Federation, Lateef Fagbemi, telling Osun State Governor Ademola Adeleke to suspend the local government elections, which are scheduled to take place on Saturday. In response, Governor Adeleke, as we can see on the front page of the Tribune, responds by telling the AGF that he is not a court of law, while declaring peace had returned to the state after that face-off over forceful takeovers of local government secretariats by the APC chairmen and councillors. The Daily Independent reports on the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, and they say that the prevalence of fake drugs in the country has escalated to an alarming rate. They join NAFDAC in complaining about 50% of the drugs in Nigeria being fake, agreeing that harsher punishment is needed. We move on to South Africa now, and the Sowetan newspaper leads with the devastating floods after heavy rainfall. Their headline says, "Floods, Mud and a Miracle." The miracle refers to parents in KwaZulu-Natal who died in a mudslide but were able to save their children by screaming for help. And then finally, The Times reports that Sir Keir Starmer has opened the door to negotiations with the European Union for a revamped youth visa scheme to allow greater freedom of movement for British people under 30. But the EU has maintained that Sir Keir is unlikely to secure a reset in relations with Brussels without an agreement that would allow 18 to 30-year-olds to live in the UK and the EU and work and study in each other's countries. Now, this is something that Yvette Cooper, who is the UK Home Secretary, insists that Labour is not in favour of because of their goal to bring net migration down. Those are your papers from around the world. We do know that a big chunk of Nigerian papers, as we saw there, look a lot at what we're seeing in terms of IBB's comments on MKO Abiola. And, you know, when I was reading through the papers this morning, that the first thing that came to mind were actually the Abiola children and how they feel, being able to know that there's so much pomp and circumstance, celebration of somebody who they feel has played a role in a lot of damage and trauma to their families. I totally understand that, you know, every saint has a past, every sinner has a future, but they definitely came to mind this morning.
Absolutely. And I expressed the same thing when earlier today. And one person I also wanted to bring up was Delegiwa as well. He did address that yesterday and said it's part of his book. He chronicled what happened during his book. Both instances, he said he wasn't responsible, but I think it's important to say the buck stopped with him then, and he does owe an explanation. So whilst people might gather together, the family of Delegiwa, the family of the Abiolas would not really be celebrating because it was under his administration that unfortunately, all these things happened. But thank you so much, Adefemi. We're out of time, so we cannot take further comments. Always great to see you. See you again next week.
See you next week.